So this is work that I've been doing in Costa Rica. My name is Daniela Shebitz, and I'm honored to be representing my student, Stephen Kerns, and a colleague, Dr. Juyoung. And we are out of New Jersey, but we've been doing work in Costa Rica. Prior to this pandemic, we were doing it for about 10 years. And what we've seen is that there's an incredibly important role that secondary forests play in the culture and the ecology of northern Costa Rica. These are forests that recover after an area is cleared, after a primary or old growth forest is cleared. And so these are forests that recover and usually take a while to get decades to get a normal species assemblage. And during that time, there's great great ecological and cultural importance. But a lot of them are threatened. And so what we're seeing is that deforestation is happening throughout the entire world. And it has a lot of devastating effects. And this is definitely the case in Costa Rica. So in Costa Rica, secondary forests comprise over half of all, in the world, it's over half of existing tropical forests globally. And yes, these support great biodiversity, and they also sequester carbon at high rates because those trees are growing really quickly. But the recovery of ecological function after an area is cleared can require several to many decades or centuries and may never happen at all. In Costa Rica, even though a lot of people think that it's a green country, and it is an eco-friendly country, but most of those forests are only given about 20 years to recover before they are, my dog is having a bad dream next to me, before they are cut again. So this is such an important problem globally, so that the United Nations Framework Conventions on Environmental Policy now actually include the creation of secondary forests through restoration. And so we're really looking at trying to save these secondary forests. They used to be called the forests of tomorrow, but now they're the forests of today, because so many of these forests are not allowed to mature. Over 40 years ago, scientists started saying that we need to manage sustainably and use sustainably these forests, but local and indigenous communities have recognized this need for much longer than that. Again, though, globally, those primary forests are increasingly being logged and changed, and so the secondary forests are now needing to be understood. What's important, though, is that the management of that is usually done through policy and doesn't include conversations with the local and indigenous people who use those secondary forests. So my work is in the northern zone of Costa Rica. This is by the border of Nicaragua. And in this region, we've lost 70% of the original forests. And in all of the country, 90% of the original forests have been destroyed. Usually, a lot of it happened through the 1990s. And 46% of that total area was converted into cattle pasture. And so this is a common problem throughout the tropics and throughout the world, where you see an imbalance between deforestation and forest regrowth. And it has a lot of consequences for resources, such as medicinal, food, and wood resources for the local and global communities. And it also plays a very important role in regulating the global carbon cycle and also for fostering biodiversity. So my work is with medicinal plants in these secondary forests. And the reason why is because in this area, there's very little access to Western medicine. So this is about 4 hours from San Jose, and they usually get a medical doctor who comes once every month. And that person actually is normally a med student. And so there's not a lot of time that they have to get the medical attention that they need. So just like 80% of the world, a lot of the people here rely on the plants in these forests for medicine. And so importantly, they have a great amount of knowledge and connection with these forests, even the secondary forests. Now, I talk about the importance of this for their local community and their local medicine. When you talk about pharmaceuticals, this is a major cause or a major need to restore or protect forests throughout the world, because there might be cures for diseases out there. And while this is very true and very important, it has a singular focus approach. And usually, if you focus on the pharmaceutical value, it becomes very extractive and excludes a lot of the local community's preferences, their ecology knowledge, their medicinal knowledge, and the awareness of their health and their dignity. So yes, it's important to focus on the medicinal potential of the plants that are in these forests. but also to bring in the cultural importance of it as well. Now, of course, biodiversity loss is having a huge effect on public health, both in those local communities and globally. And Costa Rica's forests really do embody this threat. In particular, I work with trees that are pioneer trees. So these are trees that come in after an area is disturbed, and they actually work to reclaim soil nutrients, reclaim ecological function, and also try to make sure that they have importance in not only the ecology, but the community. And I learned about these plants, these pioneer trees, through surveys that I conducted way back in 2013 with students. And we worked with the community to document 60 plants, many of which are used and harvested through the forests and through fields that are recovering following disturbance. And amazingly enough, and this man over here is Israel Mena, and he's a great friend and a partner in a lot of our research. And he talks about, and many people use the plants for gastrointestinal ailments because those are, a lot of the water is unclean, and they don't have access to a lot of clean water in this area. So most of the issues that they treat are gastrointestinal related. But a second is skin. Skin infections, usually by virtue of fungal infections or even infected insect bites. And for these ailments, the topical skin ailments, two of the trees that are really relied upon are Vismia and Pentaclethra. Now, Vismia has this beautiful red bark, and Pentaclethra is a nitrogen-fixing plant. It's in the Fabaceae, and it's a legume. And so you see them both kind of struggling, and why I like them is because they're both very easy to identify, but they're also very important for the community. Here we see Israel, who is harvesting the inner bark of a Pentaclethra. And what he does is he captures it in the palm frond leaf and then basically puts it in his boots to try to stop fungal infections. And this is really important, as we could see, for the community. It's also very important for the forest community, for biodiversity. So we worked for years on trying to document the effect of these two pioneer trees on the ecological community, on plants and animals, and also on nutrient cycling. So we found that they both have very important effects on increasing soil nitrogen and phosphorus, and tremendous effects on carbon capture. So they're not alone. So these two species are representative of all of the different species in the world that work to sequester carbon. In fact, in the forest, 81% though of this carbon is held in the soil, and a lot of it obviously is captured by plants, and then also sequestered not only in the plants, but in the soil. So we've worked a lot to look at how these plants affect the soil and how the soil affects the plants. And what we're trying to do is to link these medicinal plants to also understanding the role that the systems play for the ecology. And by doing so, we're trying to put value to the forests. My overall question is, how can we conserve forests best? So the typical idea of value is to assign an economic value. What is a Pentaclethra worth? What is a Vismia worth? But this is very extractive, and it really doesn't pay attention to the ecosystem functions and services. So really, it comes down to what are the ecological and moral questions of biodiversity that we could use as arguments to conserve forests, and also looking at a community or environmental justice issue. So how do we honor the human use of those threatened forests in order to kind of try to argue for them to be conserved? And a lot of this goes back to my mentor, Robin Wall Kimmerer, had an essay that was written just this past year that really warns us against using an extractive economy, and understanding that the market economy, so if we try to put monetary value to each species or each soil function or each ecological service that a forest plays, the problem is it transforms these abundant, freely available earthly gifts into commodities that are made scarce by privatization. She argues for more of a shift to ecological economics, which also expands the conventional definition by integrating human values and ecosystem services. But she also argues more for a gift economy. And that is where the natural world itself is understood as a gift. And not property. And so my really big question is, how can we try to argue to save these forests? And what can we learn from Boca Tapada that can be transferable to valuing secondary forests globally? Because we all know environmental justice issues are global, and the rights of local communities to use the forests that they used to have access to are now being excluded throughout the world. So a lot of the shift, I feel, needs to go towards sacred economics. And this was written by Charles Einstein, that says in nature, in those secondary or young forest ecosystems, you're going to see a lot of competition and headlong growth, but that's going to be followed by a complex interdependency, cooperation, and cycling of resources in the older growth forests. So my question, and what I'm trying to focus on and hope that I could learn from you, is how can we argue for economic systems or any way to emphasize cooperation over competition? How can we get a worldwide concern to save our secondary forests and allow them to mature before they're cut down? I'd like to acknowledge the people of Boca Tapada who share their knowledge with us over the past decade, the National Science Foundation for funding this, you for attending and for being part of this amazing society, and also my students and colleagues.